on the air with one crisis in Florida being made worse by another, because with hundreds of homes across the state ripped up by Hurricane Ian, it's only highlighting that Florida doesn't have enough homes to begin with. We're live on the ground. Plus, breaking tonight, a new legal filing from former President Trump going up to the highest court in the land. What his lawyers want the Supreme Court justices to do now. Also breaking just tonight, Twitter's telling Elon Musk, hey, you've got a deal with the world's richest man agreeing to pay the price he originally said he'd pay, what it means for the markets and your socials. And two more cases now being linked to this apparent serial killer on the loose in California, why the feds are getting involved. Plus, in tonight's original, we're bringing you an exclusive interview with one of Silicon Valley's top critics on why she's back in the biz to run a popular app you might already use. And it's never a Yeezy day with Kanye West anymore, why he's using the KKK's words to talk about Black Lives Matter. We've got that a little later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and at this hour, tonight, right now, at least 108 people have been killed from Hurricane Ian in Florida, with the number of rescues getting close to 2,000, as the question now turns to, where will people who lost their homes go next? Why? Because this state is in a housing crisis, and that was before the hurricane. Check out these numbers. They lay out just how Florida is home to some of the country's most expensive cities. Three of them, Miami, Orlando, Tampa, all on this list, all in the top 9 nationally of markets where a two-bedroom home costs more than 30% of what you make every month. It's really hard on lower-income folks, with estimates showing the state's short about 400,000 homes for people who make half of what the federal government says is fair market rent. And about half of those renters, they're either older, they're disabled, they're in school, so it's not like they can go out and just make a bunch more money a whole lot easily, or more easily, I should say. All of this means the hundreds of people who lost their homes in places like Fort Myers may not have somewhere to go now. You can see just how widespread that destruction was. Look at this aerial view. This is streets before and after the hurricane, right? Before, after. They're wiped out. They're gone. It shows you just how devastating this hurricane was. And people are just scared.
This is my mother's house. This is my whole life. My mom was supposed to retire here and spend the rest of her life and be happy, and now we have nothing.
And it may not be the end, with researchers telling the Washington Post we could be well above median for the rest of the hurricane season, which doesn't end until the end of next month. Jesse Kirsch is in Fort Myers Beach. And Jess, when you talk with people who have lost their homes, I look at the woman we just showed you there. Her parents lost everything. They were supposed to live there. They have nothing now. What are they telling you about where they're going to go?
I think there are questions around that still, Hallie. I spoke with a gentleman outside of his home over the weekend and said he lost nearly everything. He said he got a couple of boxes in the car when he fled east, but he did at the same time temper that with reminding himself and reminding us that he and his loved one are alive. And I think that's something that also is brought up time and again, as people, even in these dire situations where they've lost so much, finding a moment of appreciation for life. And I just spoke with a man who said he recently got this boat, and it was up on blocks, he said, before the storm came through here. And you can see now that it is mostly on the ground, and they have generators going over there. It looks like they're trying to dry out what is left. And off further to the left, you can see this massive structure, probably 2, if not 3 stories high. And look at what Ian did to that. These are scenes we're seeing all over these communities, Hallie. And one other thing that I want to mention, not just homes that have been lost, obviously, but businesses, including wreckages that we've seen scattered throughout this community. One couple that I've interviewed, they have a jewelry store, and they told me that they're looking at leasing a space on the mainland, further inland, for the time being, because it's not just about their business, but they said they're thinking about their employees as well. So, you know, it's cascading effects well beyond where someone's going to live. Some people's livelihoods are certainly at stake here as well now, too.
We just heard from Governor Ron DeSantis, the governor there in Florida, within the last couple hours, who's talking about the recovery push, the push to help small businesses. I think in just the last couple of minutes, Jesse, the Hurricane Recovery Center that's opening in your area, too, right?
And the governor also talked about more than 2,300 rescues being made so far. We know that those efforts are ongoing. Obviously, as time goes on, those point more and more toward possibly becoming recovery efforts, unfortunately. So that is something that was talked about by the governor. And there's also hope of bridges being built soon, Hallie, to be able to get access back to the barrier islands that have been largely cut off because of the roadways being blown out by Ian.
including Sanibel Island, which I know you visited.
That's right. We went there yesterday afternoon. We were there for a special story, an inspiring story about a family bringing a pair of Torahs from their synagogue's community to the mainland to be able to use them tonight when the sun goes down to begin Yom Kippur, the most solemn day in the Jewish calendar. But we also got to look at some of the devastation there. We saw the causeway from the water. We could see that portions of that roadway were wiped out, and there was water going right through. You could have ridden a boat right through there, Hallie.
Jesse Kirsch, glad to have you on the ground there in Fort Myers Beach. Thank you for bringing us a firsthand look at what people are still going through even today. Appreciate it. We've got more breaking news tonight in the fight over those classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, with former President Trump just late today asking the Supreme Court to get involved. Why? Here's the deal. Mr. Trump's legal team wants that so-called special master, that independent third party, to be able to review classified documents, the classified documents that the FBI found at Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. So the Trump team is basically appealing the circuit court's decision to let the Department of Justice start looking at those documents again. Remember, in the back and forth here, the Justice Department wanted to look at these documents. The special master was going to look at them. Now, the Trump team wants the Supreme Court to basically say, OK, DOJ, press pause. Special master, do your thing. Let me bring in NBC's Ken Delaney in. Help us understand this from a couple of levels, what they want the justices to do and the chances the justices are even going to take this case, because that is certainly not a guaranteed outcome here.
No, Hallie, and that, I think, is the most important point, that some legal experts I've spoken to don't believe that the Supreme Court will take this case because they don't generally get involved in these kinds of disputes about discovery in the lower courts. But then again, this is a 6-3 conservative majority, 3 of the justices appointed by President Trump. Some of them have expansive views about executive power. They may take it. But what the Trump side is asking them to do is to essentially restore the classified documents to the special master process. Remember that the appeals court said they overruled the district judge who wanted all the documents to be reviewed by the special master. The appeals court said, no, we're taking these 100-plus classified documents. We're allowing the FBI to immediately use those in its criminal investigation, and there's no reason for a special master to review them. They are the property of the government. In its argument, the Trump side is saying that one of the things the special master should decide is whether those documents were properly classified, which many people will find deeply ironic, because when the special master asked the Trump lawyers to provide any evidence that the president had declassified these documents, they declined to do it. They said it wasn't a proper request. So they seem to be speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Bottom line here, though, is that the Supreme Court may not take the case. If it does, though, Hallie, it could mean many months of delay before this thing is resolved.
Do we have any timeline for when we're going to hear from the Supreme Court, thumbs up, thumbs down, on whether they'll even look at this?
No, but since it's an emergency request, it could be rather quick, Hallie.
Ken Delaney, and I know if that happens, you and our team will be all over it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
We will.
To some breaking news now, more of it as it relates to Twitter, which late today is agreeing to this surprise reversal from Elon Musk, who now wants to buy the social media company for the amount he initially offered the social media company before pulling out of the deal with the social media company, $44 billion. In a tweet, Twitter saying they do intend to close the transaction, $54.20 a share. Musk had written a letter, his lawyers at least, that told the company that, yes, Musk was going to pull a 180 here after saying he wanted the deal, then backed out. He's now back in. Months of drama, months of fighting. Keep in mind, this all comes just a few days, relatively, a couple of weeks before they were set to go to court later this month. Julia Boorstin from CNBC, our friend of the show, is joining us now. Julia, a lot of developments, a flurry of them in the last hour that kind of made this whole thing gel. It feels like from a strategy perspective, Musk was looking ahead to this trial, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall and figuring, if I got to pay anyway, I might as well own the company if I'm going to have to pay up.
Absolutely. I mean, this comes less than 2 weeks before the start of the trial, which was set for October 17th. And even more important, Hallie, I think it's important to remember that this comes ahead of Musk's deposition, which was set for Thursday and Friday of this week. And I also wouldn't underestimate the impact of those tweets that came out late last week. Those tweets also included some messages which indicated that Musk was fully aware of there being a bot problem at Twitter, which, of course, was the center of his argument of why he shouldn't have to buy Twitter at the price he agreed to.
Right. He was basically saying, hey, you have more bots than you're owning up to. That means I get a get out of this deal free card. Twitter said not so fast. Now Musk is back in. let's say this all goes through, right? Because I was talking with the Washington Post reporter who covers Silicon Valley, who said there's some real unease, like with the Twitter employees here, anxious about what it means if Musk takes over. What does it mean for people who use Twitter? Are we going to notice any changes other than perhaps Donald Trump getting back on the platform?
Well, look, I think you're absolutely right. This is not 100% a done deal. They've agreed on a price, but the deal has not closed. And this is Elon Musk. You never know what's going to happen. So I think we're watching now to see if the judge pulls both parties together and says, are you fully agreed? Is this deal closed? If the deal does close, the question is whether Musk goes forward with his plan that he laid out months ago of what he wanted to do with Twitter. He wanted to create a subscription service. He wanted to have payments within the platform. And he had this vision of massively expanding how many people would be using Twitter by making the service far more accessible and easy to use for people who aren't in on all that Twitter jargon. Those were ambitious plans. He wanted to make the company less reliant on advertising. But we'll see how much his vision for Twitter has changed after he spent 5.5 months bashing the platform on social media.
Julia Borston, thank you. Some whiplash, I think, for business reporters like yourselves throughout the day today. Appreciate it. We should keep in mind, too, that at one point, a couple points today, Twitter trading was actually stopped. I mean, they stopped it on Wall Street because of all this volatility. Ultimately, though, the shares were up something like 12% on this news, all of it contributing to the best day that Wall Street has seen in months. Stocks were up in early trading, held on to that all day long, with the Dow closing up nearly 3%, the S&P 500 up more than 3%. That's the best day it's had since March of 2020 when the pandemic first started. Can you believe it, folks? We're talking about good news on Wall Street instead of things being in the red. It is rare because it was a September to forget, but now this October rally, again, with the Dow in green. Investors, in part, responding to this new labor report showing that job openings were dropping to the lowest level since April 2020. Let me bring in our Brian Chung, who covers this kind of thing for us. Brian, is this going to last, right? Is this October rally going to stick around for a little while longer?
Hey, Hallie. Well, obviously, if you have two back-to-back days of green days, maybe that says that things will be good for the month of October. And indeed, what we're seeing in terms of that market rally could just be a reversal of the feeling that investors have that maybe the really nasty 8% down month for the Dow Jones was just simply overdone. Now, of course, the big story does remain what's going to happen with the economic picture. And for Americans, we did get a read on the labor market this morning that says that job postings fell by about 1 million between July and August. That means about 10 million job openings in America. That's still above pre-COVID levels, but that does tell you that maybe the story is changing for the opportunities that Americans have out there in the labor market. Again, not necessarily a good thing, but do want to underscore that we'll get an updated picture because August is a few months ago. We'll get an update on what the labor market looks like in the month of September on Friday morning. That'll tell us where unemployment and also non-farm payroll gains sit. That might be a better picture for really how recessionary dynamics are playing out and whether or not they're actually present at this moment, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Today, protests outside the Supreme Court over a case that could gut the Voting Rights Act even further and affect the way that states draw their district maps for who they send to Congress down the road. So here's the deal. This whole thing centers around an Alabama map. It was drawn by the Republican-controlled legislature. And some argue it discriminates against black voters. They say basically it bunches up black voters either in one specific district or it spreads them out thinly across a whole bunch of others. The conservative justices today seem to be looking for a kind of narrow way to uphold that map. Here's the picture for you. The new map has one congressional district out of 7 where black voters would have a chance at electing a candidate who they say represents them. And given that more than a quarter of Alabama's population is black, the argument, it should have 2 to be more representative. But the state says drawing a second district for that purpose would be racially discriminatory in favor of black voters. I want to bring in now Yumi Shelsendor. You've been doing so much reporting on this issue. Let's set the stage today that things got hot. I mean, things got hot in a way that even drew the attention of people who observe the court every day.
Certainly. This was a big day for a landmark case. Merrill v. Milligan is seen as something that's going to change possibly how states across the country draw their congressional maps. So today you had 3 liberal justices in particular really hammering Alabama, going to town on them and asking them, how is this map not racially discriminatory, and how are you going to make sure that it's within the Voting Rights Act? How is it following the Voting Rights Act here? The big thing here is what you laid out, which is that 14% of the congressional delegation come from majority black communities, but African Americans make up 27% of the population in Alabama. You also heard some conservative justices.
The critics of the map look at that and go, that's not right, right? They say, like, that can't be. The numbers just don't match up.
But critics, but then you have conservatives. You're right. You had the conservative justices who were asking questions that seemed to many watching as sort of layups to try to help Alabama make their case. I talked to both sides afterwards, and they both feel good about where they are. So I will tell you, civil rights activists say it's probably going to go in favor of Alabama because this is a 6-3 conservative court.
So what would that mean for states that are redistricting moving forward writ large?
Well, this is a key question because right now the High Court is determining whether or not states that have a big minority population, a big population of people of color, and a history of racial discrimination, whether they have to take race into account, whether federal law requires that. If Alabama wins this case, then it will be no, they do not have to take race into account. I also talked to a plaintiff, Evan Milligan. His ancestors were enslaved 6 generations ago. His name is on this case, arguing that his voting power is being diluted. Let's take a listen to what he told me.
We would ask that federal courts would intervene and require them to look at the population, to look at the voting history of our state, and to produce maps that actually give black Alabamians a chance to elect candidates of their choice.
So there you have Evan laying it out, saying you need to give us a map that represents us better. And I talked to Evan after, sort of full circle moment. He came out of the court. He said
today, after arguments today, yeah.
He said it felt a little surreal because as an African-American man, this is the same court that at one point said African-Americans aren't even citizens. Now he felt as though his arguments and his stance were being argued. He said successful. He said at least good, in a good way before the court today. So he was proud of the work that they did, and he's feeling good about it.
It's interesting. Real quick, when we look ahead to November, though, this is, to be clear, this is like down the road. The Supreme Court's going to make a decision probably in the spring, et cetera. It's not going to change for the midterms this year in 5 weeks in Alabama, right?
From my understanding, it is not going to change right now. Right now, you have Terry Sewell, who is the only representative who's coming from a majority black district. The idea is whether or not they'll have a future, whether or not in the future they'll be breaking up this majority black district.
Great to see you, as always, and great reporting, Amish.
Yeah, great to be indoors.
Thank you. I mean, cold out there all day in D.C. Thank you, friend. To the White House now, where it was also chilly outside, where in the last hour or so, President Biden really put the ball in voters' court to protect abortion access, just over 100 days since the court overturned Roe versus Wade. Listen.
Congress should codify the protections of Roe and do it once and for all. But right now, we're short a handful of votes. So the only way it's going to happen is if the American people make it happen.
Let's go to Mike Memley, who's posted up at the White House for us. So, Mem, let me put up on screen for people the details that the president has rolled out today. More money for Title X grants, new Department of Education guidelines preventing discrimination on the basis of pregnancy. What he and abortion rights supporters want would be way more of this. But what you heard from the president today, 5 weeks out from the midterms, let us not forget, was a lot of the messaging we've heard from the White House ever since the overturning of Roe, which is it is up to voters. There is only so much the executive branch can do.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Hallie, between what we heard from the president but also the vice president today, this was an official event in the White House itself, but it's got as close to the line of being a political event as you could possibly have. You had the vice president, for instance, saying that we need a national law and the American people need to have their voices heard. So this was an event called to mark 100 days since this Dobbs decision did strike down the constitutional right to an abortion. But as you indicate, this is really an event about 35 days until the midterms. And listen, this issue of abortion was one that really gave Democrats a real sense that they could actually potentially have defy expectations and maybe even add to their Senate majority. We're seeing now the polls tighten in some of these key states, especially in Wisconsin, and maybe those votes are slipping away from the grasp. So this is the White House trying to re-energize that key constituency. You talked about some of the actions the president announced today. They do go far short of what advocates really say is necessary. One of the doctors, for instance, the president heard from as part of the discussion discussion today, said we need bold, brave, and immediate action. That's not necessarily going to happen. But what the president's trying to do is make this clear. This is a voting issue and not necessarily something he can do without more votes in the Senate.
What's also interesting, though, is the balancing act, or at least the juggling that the White House is doing with issues that they think will mobilize voters. So, for example, this emphasis on abortion access. But as your own reporting shows, immigration, that's probably going to wait until after the midterms based on sources you're talking to.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Hallie, because this story sort of originated from a conversation I was having with a White House official about, it was just after Kevin McCarthy, right, who he could be the Speaker of the House for Republicans if they take the majority, laid out the Republican governing agenda. I said, well, what does the president think he can get done with Republicans? And the answer really did surprise me. It was immigration. Now, let's sort of unpack what they're saying here, though. I think part of it is this is a big promise the president made during the campaign. He put forward a bill on day one of his presidency, but hasn't lifted really much legislative political capital here to try to get it over the finish line. So he wants to be able to, heading into his own potential reelection, say he did make a more full-throated effort. But as we see this as an issue that really energizes Republican voters and is potentially part of why you're seeing Democrats lose some of that ground in the polls across the country right now as Republicans focus on that in the campaign, they want to be able to really identify what they think is the real barrier for legislation, which is Republicans who are viscerally opposed to some of what the president wants to do here.
Mike Memoli, outside the White House for us. Mem, thank you. President Biden today on the phone with the Japanese Prime Minister, strongly condemning what we saw from North Korea, the launching of an unannounced ballistic missile that made its way over Japan for the first time in years. And let's be clear, folks, about what this was. This was an escalation. Look at the map here. It traveled from North Korea 2,800 miles, going over Japan before falling into the Pacific Ocean. And see, if it took another trajectory, the same distance, it could have actually hit the U.S. territory of Guam. So the U.S., the Japanese, the South Korean militaries, all responding with drills of their own today. We also saw the Japanese public put on alert, with authorities there telling folks, head to shelters. Trains were temporarily closed. Loud sirens went off across Tokyo. Our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, is joining us now. Andrea, we said it. It is an escalation. The U.S. now wants a UN Security Council meeting. But what can you do with the regime that nobody talks to, that people don't have control over? Like, how much can you actually functionally do?
They have sanctioned North Korea to the nth degree.
Teeth, right, for sure.
I mean, and they did during COVID offer some humanitarian aid, but that was not accepted. The fact is, there's very little that they can do. They've done these joint exercises, which they hadn't done for 5 years. Donald Trump canceled them without, of course, telling his Pentagon chief at the same time. They were, in Singapore meeting with, as you recall, meeting with the Kim Jong-un and the president. But now they've rescheduled those joint exercises. Today they scrambled jets. They did, testing, bombing runs, joint tests. That said, it's unclear what they can do. And the fact is, Kim Jong-un is not listening to China, his only ally in the world, because next week is President Xi's big party conference to renominate him for a third term.
Unprecedented and all of that. Yeah.
And this would be the absolute worst time. And this was an undeclared nuclear test site, rather a missile launch site on the Chinese border, making it right in
Xi's backyard. You mentioned the word nuclear because it feels like, in talking with our Pentagon pal, Courtney Kuby, what is the concern about whether this test was not nuclear, to be clear? What about the next test or the test after? What is North Korea's nuclear capabilities? Do you have a sense?
Well, they have the largest arsenal, other than the U.S. and the Russians, largest arsenal in the world. I mean, they've got untold numbers now, because there's no verification of nuclear weapons.
Untold is doing a lot of work in that sentence,
and the fact is that they are expected to do a nuclear test. We've seen in Pyongyang, the launch site, the underground launch site, these tunnels, a lot of activity, rail activity and the like, indicating that there could be a nuclear test. This could be the precursor to one. We've all been waiting for that. There hasn't been one since 2017. So that could be the next step. These missile launches, by the way, this is the longest range in quite a while.
Right.
But these launches, these are missiles that are capable of holding a warhead, but they have not miniaturized, we believe, to the point where they would actually put a warhead on a missile.
Be able to functionally do that. Now, The Biden administration has so much, as you know, from your work at the State Department and covering Secretary Blinken, on its plate internationally right now. When you look at Russia and Ukraine, how much has this missile test put sort of that region? It's always on the map, and I get everybody can walk and chew gum at the same time. But do you anticipate seeing more super high level meetings about this issue with the president and our allies?
There have actually been a lot of meetings. They met at the UN just 2 weeks ago when everyone was in New York, and there are meetings at the deputy level. The president has had Asian meetings. He's had summits there as well. So the relationship between the three major allies is pretty strong as it's ever been. You've got a new Japanese prime minister. This could be one of those anniversaries that Kim Jong-un likes to celebrate. But generally, he's done things on anniversaries that are July 4th, American anniversaries, or the anniversary of the founding of North Korea in December and January. Right. This is alarming, and we have very few options.
Andrea Mitchell, it is a stark, I think, piece of reporting. Thank you for providing, obviously, your insight into this. I really appreciate it. I have a feeling we'll be talking again soon. Thank you. Coming up, the feds now joining the investigation into that possible serial killer in Stockton, California. Police say 2 other shootings may also be linked to it now. One of those victims actually survived. We're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. Plus, royal drama this time over Denmark's queen. Why she's apologizing to her family in the 5 things. Tonight, we're expecting an update from police on the series of murders in Northern California. An investigation we now know the feds are getting involved in after police linked 2 more cases back to a possible serial killer on the loose. Both happened in mid-April of last year. Back on the 16th, a 46-year-old black woman was shot and survived the attack. On the 10th, a 40-year-old Hispanic man was shot to death in Oakland, more than 70 miles away from Stockton, where the other 5 people were killed. The community's taken this threat super seriously. There's a reward for information that could lead to this suspected serial killer's arrest. It's now nearly $100,000. I want to bring in Miguel Almaguer, who is live for us out west. So, Miguel, 6 murders now linked to this potential serial killer. One not even in the same city as the others. Talk through how officials figure out they're all connected and the Fed involvement of this, because that's a new piece of this story that we're finding out today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question, Hallie, and it's one that police won't actually answer directly just yet. While authorities won't confirm how these murders have been tied together, the victims were shot, and it's likely that ballistics were used to match a single firearm to all 7 victims, including that sole survivor that you mentioned. During the murders, there were no robbery attempts, and police didn't say there was a physical struggle, so it's highly possible that the same murder weapon was used. The map of where these crimes took place was also originally a fairly tight radius, but now with that killing in Oakland, which is over an hour away from Stockton, the crime map has expanded quite a bit. Police won't say how close they are to an arrest, but because they've released a very poor, grainy, dark image of a suspect, it doesn't sound like an arrest is imminent. Investigators are also combing through old murders to see if anything else can be linked to the killing spree. And as you asked about the Fed's involvement, the Feds will bring new resources that local police don't have. It's a collaborative effort that should help multiple agencies figure out, was the gun used in other crimes, and if it was ever registered. They'll also be able to help sweep through all that surveillance video, hoping to triangulate where the suspect or suspects have been and where they came from. Authorities are looking for that one big break, Hallie.
We've talked about, will they get this big break for catching the suspect? We've talked about the investigation itself. What about the people, the victims here? We're learning more about them, right?
Yeah, we are. Police have actually released little information about the victims. We're getting a better picture of who they are. They range in age from 21 to 54 years old. Most, but not all, of the victims have been identified as Hispanic, and the only person to survive the shooting was a woman. Authorities still have not said why the victims were targeted or but they have said they were alone in poorly lit areas after dark. Some of the victims' families tell us their loved ones were living on the streets, but we know not all of the victims were homeless. Because this killing spree has spanned at least 15 months now, authorities also believe there could be more victims. They just haven't connected to this crime spree yet, Hallie.
Miguel Almaguer, live for us there out in California. Miguel, thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the DEA says somebody has been arrested after the agency seized about 15,000 of those so-called rainbow fentanyl pills. The agency says, look at this, they were hidden in a Lego box. They were supposed to be distributed in New York City. This is the biggest seizure of fentanyl pills in that city to date. Number 2. I'm sure you heard about this. Country music icon Loretta Lynn died this morning at her home in Tennessee. She was 90 years old. She released more than 60 albums throughout her long and illustrated career. Some of her biggest hits, songs like Coal Miner's Daughter and You Ain't Woman Enough. She was the first woman named Entertainer of the Year by the Country Music Association in 1972. Number 3, Denmark's Queen Margrethe is apologizing to her family. She got some backlash from a few of them over her decision to strip 4 of her grandkids of their royal titles. Last week, she said her younger son's children would no longer be known as princes or princesses starting in January. That son told a tabloid he got basically no heads up. The Queen says she wants to streamline the royal family going forward. That's why she made those moves. Number 4, free samples. They are back in some Trader Joe's. Look at this. Tell me the pandemic seems like it's over without telling me the pandemic seems like it's over. This is what people were posting, right? All of these snacks at Trader Joe's over the weekend. The company had stopped doing them back in 2020 when COVID hit. No official update from Trader Joe's, but the food speaks for itself. Number 5, it's almost time to vote for your favorite big bear because Fat Bear Week officially starts tomorrow, where the brown bears of Katmai National Park in Alaska go head-to-head. People picking which ones made the most gains in their bulking season ahead of hibernation. Gotta love Fat Bear Week. Who doesn't? A lot of matchups in Fat Bear Week. Bear 335 v. Bear 164 versus 747 against 856. Catchy names, folks. The winner of the whole thing is going to be announced next week. Fat Bear Tuesday, obviously. I'm sure it's on your cows. Just into us now. Some new drama in the legal fight between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, with court documents filed today by Jolie's team making claims we have not seen before about what happened on a private plane they were on with their kids 6 years ago. NBC News has obtained this new filing where Jolie is accusing Pitt of trying to get her to sign an NDA to not talk about what she alleges is his abuse, physically and emotionally, of her and their kids outside, except for in court proceedings. It's connected to this legal battle over a winery the two of them owned, and to a story we brought you a few weeks ago when we learned the FBI decided not to prosecute Pitt. We should note that NBC News is out to Pitt and Jolie's teams for a response. We have not heard back. Let's bring in Danny Savalos. And Danny, her legal team says the abuse went beyond that September 2016 alleged outburst, where they say Pitt allegedly choked one of their kids, hit another in the face, grabbed Jolie by the head. Tell us more about this and what your takeaways are from this cross-complaint.
It appears that when the FBI investigated, they may have found enough probable cause to prosecute, but they may have decided not to ultimately. At least it appears possibly because Jolie was not entirely sure she wanted to go forward with the prosecution. If that's the case and they had the probable cause to go forward, then that is a pretty damning thing against Brad Pitt, especially on an airplane where I imagine Jolie might be able to find some witnesses to back that story up. But when you take a step back, this information really only came out of litigation over a winery that is part of a dispute between Pitt and Jolie as they try to split up their assets, as in any breakup or divorce.
What's so, I think, notable about this case, besides the sort of obvious, the allegations that were made that are significant here, that are in Jolie's filing that we described, these allegations against the kids, against her, is that in large part for a case with such high-profile celebrities, this has been played outside the court of public opinion. We haven't seen or heard much about it except for these dribs and drabs from filings that have come out until today. Talk about resolution moving forward here.
This is a civil suit, as are many civil suits. And when you are a high-profile litigant, you have a lot at stake. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie have a lot to lose if this case continues to go through the courts. Even if documents are not readily available, eventually they may find their way out to the public. And these allegations could end up really harming both sides. So even though this really has a criminal feel because it was part of a possible criminal investigation by the FBI, it's really a civil case. And when that's the case, either litigant has a lot of power in stopping things from moving forward by simply resolving the dispute out of court.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much for that legal breakdown. Appreciate it. Still to come, an NBC News exclusive. Our Jake Ward scoring an interview with the person who led walkouts at Google, who has fought big tech, now getting back into big tech. We'll talk about why and what she has to say about Signal next. 4 people kidnapped in California, one of them just a baby. Police say the suspect is armed and dangerous. We're going to have more on this story coming up in The Local. But first, to tonight's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And tonight, one of Silicon Valley's most outspoken critics has just taken a job in Silicon Valley at a place some people consider one of the most important emerging platforms in the world. We're talking about Meredith Whitaker, who led walkout protests at Google. She is now president at Signal, an encrypted messaging app which is designed to provide total privacy for people who use it. Jake Ward sat down with Whitaker for an exclusive interview.
The new president of Signal is a very unusual tech executive. Best known for critiquing companies, not leading them, Meredith Whitaker now runs what experts call the last truly anonymous messaging platform. It's used by journalists, world leaders, activists, and criminals. Anyone who wishes to keep their communications absolutely private. Whitaker first became nationally known in the tech industry as a leader of walkouts at Google over a controversial military program there.
One night, I hear from somebody I know that Google is signing a contract with the U.S. Department of Defense to build machine vision, which is a type of automated AI for drone surveillance and targeting for the U.S. drone program. Every angle of that, it's pretty messy.
She organized protests and left Google in 2019 to create an ethics institute at NYU. Whitaker was then recruited by Lena Khan, the Federal Trade Commission chair, to be an in-house academic in the commission's work to regulate big tech.
We can walk down the street, not know we're being profiled by facial recognition cameras. Those images can be sent to different data brokers, and they can inform AI models that then inform our chances of employment. We have no idea any of this is happening.
Why suddenly take the reins of an organization after all this time analyzing them from both the inside and the outside?
This was a project that was funded by grants at the beginning, that is a nonprofit. So this is not a tech company, again, that is governed by the surveillance business model, that is governed by the pursuit of profit. The mission of Signal is to provide access to truly private digital communications whenever they want it.
How will you pay for this? How will you keep it going?
Some percentage of the many millions of people who use Signal will be willing to kick in, say, $5 a month. Because we don't monetize our data, because we don't collect any of that data to be monetized, we need to support Signal otherwise.
Whitaker says it's clear that Signal is the most anonymous major tech platform. WhatsApp is encrypted, she points out, but it's owned by Facebook parent Meta.
So you can join the limited data that WhatsApp has with the massive stores of surveillance data that Facebook has and produce some pretty staggering insights. On the other hand, Signal doesn't have any of that data.
Law enforcement regularly subpoenas tech companies, including Signal, for things like messages, pictures, phone logs, and has criticized the industry for being opaque.
How do you articulate what it is about the surveillance economy that has made everything free, has made all of us the product, and that you can only really escape if you use a service like yours and kick in $5 if you can?
People over the past half decade have grown to recognize that there's a real problem with a handful of companies having such a monumental amount of intimate information about all of us that they routinely share with states. I don't think all tech needs to exist, because most tech that exists was built because somebody thought they could make money off it. And you can make a lot of money selling real-time facial recognition to oppressive police departments. You can make a lot of money selling surveillance and monitoring equipment to stalkers, right? Like, there are some really bad tech business models. I think arguably many of those should not exist.
Now, she has to develop a way to protect and grow the one company she says fits with her mission of fighting off surveillance in our lives.
We exist to provide a protected enclave where we can have actually private, experimental, intimate conversations without being caught up in the nexus of corporate state surveillance. That's why I'm there.
Jake is with us now live. Jake, thank you for bringing us that exclusive interview. Talk to me about what you're hearing from the reporting that you're doing on folks at Signal and how they feel about somebody like Whitaker coming on board.
Well, Whitaker has been on the board of Signal for some time, has long-standing intellectual ties to its founder, and also, she is someone who just speaks with enormous experience about what it is to try to create something that's going to push against the tide. The idea that this is going to remain a free service without selling all of our data the way that all the other big tech platforms tend to do, you know, that's a really big change. She also, I would say, Hallie, articulates the specific role of anonymous messaging platforms in a really interesting way. I asked her, well, don't you, you know, what will your response be when the police come to you and ask to, you know, subpoena the records of, you know, the communications that have gone on there? What do you feel about criminality on the platform? And she said, you know what? You would never ask the maker of a pen what the pen has written, because that's not how pens work. You should never be asking platforms like ours what people are writing on them, because that's not how Signal works. She's the kind of person who articulates this stuff in a new way and is going to try a very new business model, and that is what makes her so interesting to watch here, Hallie.
Jake Ward, thank you for bringing it to us. Appreciate it. Coming up, national Republicans standing by Georgia Senate candidate Herschel Walker after a bombshell report claiming he paid for a girlfriend's abortion more than a decade ago as an anti-abortion candidate before he was one. What this means for his Senate race. Plus, the FBI says a reported explosion at Northeastern University, remember that, was a hoax, and that somebody's been arrested. We've got the latest on that in the local next. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, an 8-month-old girl, her parents, and an uncle were kidnapped in Merced County, California this week. Officials describing the kidnapper as armed and dangerous. The sheriff's office says the people were taken from a family business. Look at this little kiddo. The office released images of this guy, shaved head with a hoodie, surgical mask. They think he is a suspect. No word on any kind of motive here. From our Northeast Bureau, a reported explosion at Northeastern University last month was a hoax, and the employee who said he was hurt has been arrested, according to court documents. The FBI says the suspect was arrested near his home in San Antonio, charged with falsely conveying a bomb threat and lying to federal agents during his interview. The man was the school's new technology manager and director of the Immersive Media Lab. Also from our Northeast Bureau, a New York farmer broke the national record for heaviest pumpkin. There it is in Clarence, New York. It weighs more than 2,500 pounds. It was like 148 pounds short of breaking the Guinness World Record. Wait until they bust this thing down for a PSL. Add a little spice and a little coffee, put it in a Starbucks cup. Feed hundreds of your friends. Tonight, some big-name Republicans and big organizations that pay for Republican Senate campaigns, they are defending the Republican nominee for Senate in Georgia, Herschel Walker, after a bombshell report from the Daily Beast alleges Walker paid for his girlfriend's abortion in 2009. Keep in mind, he is running as an anti-abortion candidate. Walker is denying the allegations in a tweet, calling them a flat-out lie, and says he plans to sue the Daily Beast for defamation. NBC News has not yet verified these allegations, we should note. Florida Senator Rick Scott today calling the report a smear machine. Former President Trump says Walker is being slandered and maligned. Anti-abortion rights groups are standing behind him, too. I want to bring in now Sahil Kapoor. And I think it's important to note, Sahil, that original Daily Beast report brought receipts, and I mean that literally, not in like the slangy way. There was literally a receipt. There was a note that they saw was provided by Walker. There was a check, for example, et cetera. I mean, there was documentation and what they describe as corroboration to back this up. Again, Walker denies it. But our political unit points out in a different era, pre-Donald Trump, perhaps this would have been a campaign-ending story.
Right, and the corroboration, of course, was a woman she told at the time who was aware of it and who helped take care of her after the abortion took place. But you're absolutely right, Hallie. This is the type of candidacy that Mitch McConnell might, in a previous era, compare to the Todd Akins, the Richard Murdochs, people who had scandals occur that were arguably less severe than this.
But now McConnell's leadership, his folks are backing Walker. They're out there supporting it.
Fully backing Walker. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, which ultimately answers to McConnell, is standing behind him. The Senate Leadership Fund, which is the biggest spending group on the Senate side, heavily invested in Georgia, announced today that they're full speed ahead. Donald Trump, whose early endorsement of Herschel Walker propelled him to this nomination, essentially cleared the field for him, standing behind him as well. And two major anti-abortion groups, SBA and the National Right to Life, are also standing behind Herschel Walker. It is a new world where something like this can break as an October surprise so close to the election, and the entire party rallies around you.
Worth noting, 5 weeks out, there is actually, let's say hypothetically, Walker were to drop out, Republicans would effectively be conceding the race to the Democrat in this situation, because you can't put another Republican on the ballot this close to an election.
That is the single most important reason I think they're standing behind him. And the Georgia Senate race is so crucial to the path for the majority. This seat was the majority maker in the 2020 election, with Raphael Warnock himself being number 49 and number 50, if you include John Ossoff.
Sure.
The polls show a neck-and-neck race. You see this on the screen right now. A Fox News poll showed it a 5-point race. There are other polls that show it even closer. A CBS poll showed it a 2-point race, and the average is somewhere around 1 to 2 points. So this could be the seat yet again that determines whether it's Chuck Schumer and the Democrats running the Senate or Mitch McConnell, the Republicans running the Senate. That is why we're seeing this rallying effect among Republicans as other opportunities that they thought they had are fading in places like Arizona and New Hampshire. Those races are falling away. They see Georgia as probably make or break.
And perhaps Pennsylvania, too. You also look at what's happening with anti-abortion groups supporting Walker. There's also reaction from Walker's son, Christian. I want to play a little bit of this Twitter video. Watch.
Family values people. He has 4 kids, 4 different women, wasn't in the house raising one of them. I was silent lie after lie after lie. The abortion card drops yesterday. It's literally his handwriting in the card. They say they have receipts, whatever. He gets on Twitter. He lies about it.
NBC News has not verified his claims. Christian didn't give evidence to back it up. Walker said in the past he hasn't denied his kids, and said in his own tweet he loves his son. Point being, this is not the first time that Herschel Walker has been in the very public spotlight for some of the controversies in his life.
It's not, but there's the drip, drip, drip aspect of it. A few months ago, I believe it was the same publication, the Daily Beast, and the same reporter who broke the story that Herschel Walker had several children that he had not publicly disclosed before. But, you know, this isn't just a story about a flawed individual who we all knew Herschel Walker was. That was well known. This is also a story about political hypocrisy, as his son is trying to point out here, if this report, you know, were to be true, that he's running as a pro-life candidate. He's running as a candidate of family values while this is happening, and you have his own son accusing him of being an absentee father. This is strong stuff, and I would not discount the ability for this to move the electorate in some form or fashion. No matter how polarized and calcified we are, there still are those voters in the middle who can make the difference, who do take into account allegations like this.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much. Appreciate you being with us. Good to see you in studio tonight. When we come back, Kanye West at the center of controversy yet again. He's being accused of empowering right-wing ideology. Stay with us. Kanye West calling the Black Lives Matter movement a scam in a now-deleted Instagram story post from earlier today, after he made another big and very controversial statement at a surprise Yeezy fashion show in Paris 24 hours ago. You can see it here. He wore a shirt that read "White Lives Matter" on the back. The pictures that you're looking at were posted by right-wing commentator Candace Owens. So you're thinking that phrase, what is it? The Anti-Defamation League says it's racist, linking it to at least one white supremacist group that has promoted that phrase. And the whole thing did not go down well on social media. Celebrities, people in the fashion industry commenting on the message being sent. Jaden Smith said he left the fashion show because of it. So did others. An editor at Vogue saying on Instagram it was indefensible behavior. NBC News has reached out to Kanye West's team for comment, but we have not heard back yet. Ron Allen is joining us now. And Ron, there's one op-ed in Vogue that said the move is not just a way to ruffle feathers and get attention, but that instead it is empowering right-wing ideology. This is a phrase that groups like the KKK were using in response to the Black Lives Matter movement.
There's a lot of criticism because people are concerned that others, extremists, will act on these words. And it's not just words, it's what deeds and what harmful acts might follow. There were more comments that I can share with you from the New York Times. The chief fashion editor, Vanessa Friedman, the headline, "There is no excuse for Ye's White Lives Matter shirt." Also, there was an interesting comment from the family of Ahmaud Arbery. Remember the young man who was killed in Georgia, gunned down by 3 neighbors who are now serving life sentences for federal hate crimes. Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, pointed out that Kanye West was supportive of the family and helpful, and she welcomed that. And she said she was very disappointed by this, not just the shirt that said "White Lives Matter," but the fact that he has doubled down on it and said that the Black Lives Matter movement was a scam. She says it's disappointing and it's hypocritical, and so there's criticism not just from the fashion industry, but from many corners of different communities.
This also is part of let's call it what it is, right? Is a pattern by Kanye West where he says something, walks it back. It is considered problematic, et cetera. There's backlash. I mean, this is not the first time something like this has happened, despite the fact that it is, you know, as you've laid out, this extremist phrase.
One of the most controversial things he said was that slavery, he was doing an interview with TMZ, and he said that slavery lasting 400 years, he said it sounds like that was a choice. He also was questioning whether Harriet Tubman actually freed slaves. He says a lot of very inflammatory things, and that really leave people feeling, well, angry, quite frankly. And yes, he has done this time and time again. But the other thing to point out, he's still one of the biggest selling musical artists of all time. His fashion, his clothes are apparently not doing badly either. So while he is doubling down and making these statements and angering people, he's still making a lot of money as well. Something for people to think about, perhaps. But yes, this whole White Lives Matter issue, this shirt that he wore at this huge Fashion Week affair in Paris, it's upsetting a lot of people because it was a real in-your-face thing. You couldn't miss it. It was more prominent than any of the clothes that the models were wearing, and one of the models apparently wore the shirt on the runway. So it was very much in your face, if you will, and that's why people are very, very upset about it, especially, again, because they don't see it just as words. They see it as something that people might actually act on.
Ron Allen, a great breakdown. Thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it. That's a wrap for this hour. We'll have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Glad you're with us. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.